So in February of this year, I put in an order for Fujifilm X100 VI. This is a camera I've wanted for a long time. I mean, basically I wanted the predecessor, right? The Fujifilm X100 V or V was a camera that took the internet by storm, and I just loved all the images I saw coming out of that camera and how small and portable it was. So when the 6 was announced, I waited a few hours because it was a lot of money to spend on a camera, but I put in an order through BH Photo that day because I wanted to make sure I got it as soon as possible. Well, flash forward to just a few weeks ago, I got an email saying I definitely won't get that camera before September of this year. So suffice it to say, I've not had the Fujifilm X100 VI, and this is not a video about that camera. This is a video about my iPhone 15 Pro Max and a trip I took to San Francisco this week from Monday through Friday, yesterday, and the photos I took along the way. I've been blown away by the iPhone as a camera for years, but especially the 15 Pro Max with its 5x zoom lens and the 48 megapixel sensor that I believe it inherited from the 14 Pro and Pro Max. It has 7 focal lengths. Although it only has 3 lenses, it uses some crop modes to give you a lot of versatility, punching into that large sensor to give you essentially 4 different zoom levels from that sensor, and then an ultra wide and a telephoto 128mm equivalent. It is a very powerful camera package, especially to have on you at all times. You've probably heard the saying, the best camera is the one you have on you. And this is the epitome of that. But it's not just that it's with you, because smartphone cameras have tended to be with us for over a decade, almost 2, which is crazy to think about. But no, it's the fact that it's actually just so good as a camera and how far above its weight it seems to punch compared to even just a few generations ago. I believe there are probably other better cameras on different smartphones depending on who you ask. I've loved the images I got out of the Pixel 6 Pro, for example, when I had that. It was a bad phone for me because I got a glitchy one, but it was an amazing camera. I like the quality of those photos a lot. But this camera is so versatile, inheriting similar feature sets like the 5x zoom that I believe the Pixel 6 Pro had, a larger primary sensor like the Pixel 6 Pro had, and then just generally handling most lighting situations very well. And so I'm gonna show you some photos I took and let you decide for yourself. Do these look good? Do they look bad? Personally, I'm pretty biased. You know, I took these photos and this was my trip, so I have memories attached to it, but I really do think this is one of the best vacation cameras you can have. And because it's the only camera I took on this trip, it was solely responsible for capturing these memories. And I'm really grateful I had it with me. So let's look at some of these photos and you can decide for yourself, do you like them or not? I will be looking at them on my LG OLED TV, but you will be seeing them on the screen so that you can get the full resolution of these images. I recommend watching on a TV or a large monitor, but watch on a phone wherever you want, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you to everyone who's liked and subscribed. To everyone who's checked out my album, There's Something Better. You rule. All right, let's check these out. So this is the first shot of the series, and I like the dynamic range of the image, that you're still able to see some details on the silhouettes of the people in the airport, but that there's so much crisp detail in the window behind it. This is a shot from the seat of the airplane, and again, there's something about that natural depth of field in the image that I really love here. This was the hotel I stayed at, the Hyatt Regency in the Embarcadero Center. I love the brutalist architecture, and I felt like this image gives you so much detail and crispiness, which is I think like a adjective that'll probably be used to describe a lot of these photos. This is the interior of the hotel, and again, the way light is captured here, the amount of detail that you get as the light shoots down from the top onto this sculpture in the center, and then even the dark details that are still retained in the lower portions of the image. These are the elevators in the hotel. And again, that detail of these moving elevators was awesome. I got this nice weird looking seagull, kind of like a scruffy seagull guy. And again, I love the depth of this image. I think it did a good job of staying sharp on the subject and then creating this depth of field behind them. And then here was down this boardwalk I had walked down, looking back towards the city. And then Coit Tower, which I just happened upon. And here's an example of the 5x lens. And I think you can see that there's a little bit less detail. It looks more like a smartphone image from a few years ago, but you're able to capture shots you just could not get otherwise because you have so much reach on the lens. And I think the trade-off is worth it. On a huge screen, you can definitely tell this is a smartphone photo, but on my phone and when sharing it on social media, I feel like it fit perfectly with the rest of the images I took. This is another 5x shot, and I actually think this is an even better detail retention. And then this is that same shot from how far away I actually was with the standard lens. I ended up accidentally climbing up to Coit Tower, and I took this shot, another 5x shot, I believe, punched into the city from the walk up. And there's a few of these, and I really like the detail you can see in the leaves and the detail in the buildings. Again, there's just so much sharpness. This is one of the higher megapixel images. I believe it defaults to 24 megapixels for your primary sensor, even though it is a 48 megapixel sensor. It does pixel binning and cuts that resolution in half, giving you larger pixels that capture more light. There are probably better technical explanations for it, but that's my understanding of how this is working. And then here we have that 5x zoom again, and I just love that depth of field, the blurriness of the plants, and then the detail in the skyscrapers behind them. Same here, just the same area, but moved over. And this is just a wide shot of Coit Tower and an ultra wide to kind of show you the difference. So wide shot and the ultra wide shot. You get a lot of distortion of the people in the lower left, but you get even more of the area around. This is a 5x zoom of the Golden Gate Bridge from Coit Tower. And then I actually really like the composition of this shot. The light and the dark, again, you don't lose all of the details. There's just a really good balance of high dynamic range here. I love the red of these like cloth coverings for all these tables, just all, I don't know, the whole look of this image. I was just so stoked to see this in real life and then to capture that image and how it came out. I would put this side by side with any camera I've ever used, better like dedicated cameras. I think this is a fantastic image, but could be biased here. This is the 5x zoom, capturing some graffiti from way across the street. And I think you can tell again, like there's a bit of degradation when you're really up close to the image, but I still think they stand up as images, these 5x shots. This is another, I think, zoomed in shot of a person just sitting on a motorcycle. I just thought this was such a cool pose and such a cool image. And again, the depth, like, I think this has to be the 5x, could be wrong, but the 5x can compress the image a bit in a way that I really like. This is as I started to walk through Chinatown. I just love the way the colors are captured. This iPhone is the closest that they've ever been to the Pixels colors, which I think are like the gold standard. And having the versatility of the cameras and the lenses in the iPhone, the iOS platform, the ability to airdrop and all the things you get with iOS like iMessage and the integration with the iPad, things like that, and having some of the things I liked about the Pixel 6 in a camera is really cool. I really like this one. You get the tower in the distance, and you can even see that bird caught in motion in the right. Again, just the way light is captured here. I feel like the iPhones used to have this tendency to go way too far with yellows and oranges, and I think this is a good example of it capturing them naturally and not being too overblown the way I feel like they were on like the iPhone XS, for example. This I wanted to show because one, it was a cool drink, but two, the iPhone wants to go into ultra wide mode when you get close to an object because it wants to essentially take a macro photo. And I think it does a real disservice to food when you do that. So I turn that off essentially. When it highlights it, it'll show a yellow flower basically. And I click no on that to go back to the standard lens. So you get this really nice depth of field. The trade-off is that if you get too close to the subject, it will not be able to focus. But at this distance, I way prefer the standard camera versus the macro lens when it tries to force into the macro. People would just keep coming up to this car and taking photos of it. It was very cool. It was right in front of the restaurant I went to, Mona Lisa, which was fantastic. Super nice service, really nice people. I was stoked to be there. And this was the tiramisu that I had for dessert. Fantastic. And again, the same sort of depth of field thing I'm talking about here, where if you got even just a little bit closer, it would be basically impossible to focus on the subject. But because you're not using the ultra wide lens the way it wants you to, there's just so much nice depth in the image. And I think especially, not that everyone loves pictures of food, right? But if you're trying to capture a nice meal photo, I highly recommend not using the macro lens feature that it tries to force on you. I didn't take a ton of night photos, but this is one I really like, especially where there's a lot of light. You can see there's so much nice detail in that building at the center of the image, and where light is cast, there is a pretty organic feeling. Although I will say the iPhone, much like many smartphones, tends to make night look brighter than it looks in real life. I think this phone does a good job of not overdoing it. You can see some muddiness in the image if you look towards the very far distance, where there's less natural light. So the image starts to break apart a little bit and you can see kind of that ISO or the digital noise. But where there is light, I think it's really sharp. And overall, I think this is a pretty pleasing image, even blown up at scale. This is a 5x zoom shot at night, and I actually really like the details that are captured here. One, I just thought it was funny, the love specialist thing, but also just how the light comes through in the image. I actually manually lowered the exposure for this one so that the neon elements would pop out more and not be blown out. The next day I went to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, or SF MoMA, and I took a bunch of pictures here. This was one I really liked. I mean, again, at this point you're just capturing other people's amazing art. But here's one of the actual space on the second floor looking down. This was a piece of art that is huge when you're standing next to it. And one thing I wanted to do with my camera was capture the feeling. So this doesn't really do it justice. So I started getting really close and taking these pictures of this paint that was layered over and over. I mean, years were spent layering paint and cutting into it. And I wanted to remember the feeling of being in front of this giant image. And so being able to really get close and capture that was cool. And the amount of detail that I think is captured in these images is really neat and does some justice to the larger overall piece. I actually have a bunch more shots for almost everything I'm showing you, but I didn't want to be super boring. So trying to keep it focused on the best ones. This was a shot I thought was cool. It captures all the detail of this art in the distance and the person, but it just does it in a pleasing way. I think there was this era of smartphone photography like 5-6 years ago where you could really tell when something was a smartphone shot, but the depth of field on the primary sensor of this camera is just so nice. And I think this is a really pleasing image. The ability to capture the neon and the room, just again, high dynamic range in this image is something I think is really powerful. And one of my favorite things about using the iPhone as a primary camera on this trip was just knowing that any shot I took, it was gonna capture something nice. I took a bunch of photos of this sign, but it was mostly because the neon would turn off and on in different areas. But every single one I took looked great. I just wanted to use this one because this is when the whole thing was illuminated. This is an example where I actually boosted the exposure, I think. I can't remember if I turned it down or up, but it was to capture even more of that brightness, and I thought this did a great job of that. But all of that is in camera. I should have said that way earlier, but none of these images are edited. This is straight out of camera, transfer the files over to my desktop, and this is the Windows Explorer, but you'll be seeing it in DaVinci Resolve. The ability to capture these pieces of art in a way that I think does justice to them in detail is so nice. This is another one where you can't really tell the scale of this image. And so this is where I actually use the video camera to give this is what it actually felt like to look at the image. It's so big when you're in front of it, and I wanted to capture some of that feeling so I could remember that it didn't really look like looking at the square, it looked like looking into a city. There was this really cool Art of Noise, I believe is what it was called, exhibit, all about like music design, posters, some sound design stuff, and actual objects that create sound, like radios and other music playback devices. So these were some posters I thought were really cool in the initial area, and I thought this camera did a good job of capturing these in the detail and the color and the contrast. LCD Sound System and Beck are some of my favorite artists, so it was cool to see posters for them. And then these classic iPod posters are now old enough to be in a museum. Although it is the Museum of Modern Art, it's still kind of funny being like, oh wow, I remember when these were modern, and now these are kind of classic. And then some awesome early 2000s posters, including Radiohead and U2. I just love the style of these. In this photo, we can see some awesome depth of field and focus on these objects. We've got a Teenage Engineering OB4. There was actually a lot of representation for Teenage Engineering in this exhibit, which is cool. I mean, they're a design studio, right, first and foremost, and so it makes sense that their designs would be represented in a museum. The detail here and the depth of field, again, this feels like a pro camera to me. This is that Walkman from Guardians of the Galaxy. I thought this was pretty cool, along with all these other objects. And again, that blurriness in the back, the detail in the center subject. This is not portrait mode. This is just how it's handling focus, sharpness. The only thing I don't like about these photos is I think they're a little bit more leaning to the orange in the white balance. If I were to edit these, I would probably take them a little bit bluer. This is an example of portrait mode. And I think portrait mode has come a really long way since it was first introduced in, I want to say, the iPhone 7 Plus, when it first had that telephoto camera. Here, I think it does a really good job of isolating the object, or the subject rather, from the background. And this is another example of that. This is a pretty complex object, and I still think it did a relatively great job of isolating that subject and blurring only the other areas. It does degrade a little bit. There are areas where it's not perfect, but overall, especially on a smartphone screen, it looks basically perfect. And this is an example of portrait mode off. This is that natural bokeh and the natural blur with the sharpness of the object in the forefront. This is a Teenage Engineering device, and this is one of a few panoramas I took, but this is an example where panorama mode does not work. This is a clean rectangle and trying to capture it this way. Totally borked it, but I thought it was funny and I decided to show it anyway. But yeah, this is like a Teenage Engineering custom deck thing they built, and this looks really cool. So here's a really good contrast between the ultra wide and the primary sensor. I think if you look at this image, especially on a large screen, there's so much sharpness. The primary 48 megapixel sensor, when capturing those 24 megapixel images, it looks to me as sharp and as nice as any camera I've used. But I wanted to capture a wider image to get those antennae, right? When we zoom out in the ultra wide, I think you lose some detail for sure, comparatively, on a big screen. But this image is still really pleasing. And I think it's awesome to have the ultra wide and to still be able to capture the whole of the shape here of this device. That said, the ultra wide and the telephoto are areas I hope they focus on improving. It would be very cool to see an increase in the megapixel count for the sensors on the ultra wide and the telephoto, which I believe the Pixel 6 Pro even already had. And here's a 5x zoom lens shot of an individual poster on one of those large poster walls. I think there's some degradation here, but overall it's still a nice image. And this was the sound portion of the Art of Noise room. And again, I think it does a really good job of not blowing out the highlights in the light and not losing the detail in the dark areas of the scene, but still looking pretty realistic. Overall, I think this is a tough shot to get right, and I think it did a good job. And then this was just a picture I thought. This painting was just amazing. At first, I couldn't even tell it was a painting. And I think this does a good job of capturing that. Again, some of these are just photos to capture art that I thought was beautiful. Same with this piece here, this tapestry. But again, that color, the way everything comes through, the sharpness of it all, I think this did a lovely job capturing this image. This was a shot of me and my Evangelion fit. This was a shot of the bridge I really liked, the way the lamp posts are moving in the direction of the bridge and then the bridge is coming out here. There's a little bit of a car in the shot. I thought I timed it to where the car wasn't there, but it's there, but it's okay. This is a shot I really like. Again, that depth and that distance. This is the ultra wide at Francisco Park. I think it did a good job of capturing the whole scene. I don't think I included the non-ultra wide version here. The non-ultra wide version is sharper, but I do like being able to see the whole park here. This is the 5x zoom lens, and this is an example where I think it really shines. Just having the ability to punch in like this and see the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance at sunset with that fog in the background. I liked the light of this building, the sharpness. This is the primary sensor. This is another 5x. And this is, again, an image where I'm grateful to be able to capture this compression of essentially flattening that depth of field, even if you can definitely tell this is a smartphone photo compared to this photo where I do think there's so much sharpness and detail. You could mistake it for a pro camera shot. This one, there's a lot of telltale giveaways that it's not quite as high of quality in the resolution, but I still think it's a nice image. And then this one, I think it's like the Hall of Famer for me. My favorite shot I took that day. Could not have gotten it without the 5x lens. Again, not a perfect shot. There's degradation in the dark areas, but being able to see the Palace of Fine Arts and the Golden Gate Bridge and the way it's all put together. Without the 5x lens, I couldn't have taken this photo. This photo doesn't exist without it, and so I love that lens, even if it's not perfect. This is an example of what the primary sensor saw looking down the street. So much sharpness, so much detail. This is that same exact spot on the 5x. You lose, again, some sharpness, but you gain this really nice compression in the image. I'm glad to have both. If you ask me which is the better image, I think they're both great. What's sharper? This one for sure. And I like the colors in this one for sure. But being able to just punch in like that is a really cool option to have. I just thought it was funny that this Alhambra Theater was also a Crunch Fitness, but I like how this came out. And then again, this is that thing I was talking about earlier. If you want to take food photos with the iPhone, do not let it go into the macro mode because it's gonna really butcher the depth of field. Honestly, you don't need a super sharp image with no depth of field for a food shot like this, or even just any kind of close up like this. I think it benefits so much from the natural bokeh and the natural depth of field on the primary sensor. This is a night shot, true night mode, and I think this came out great. It captures a lot of detail here in the tree, in the vehicles. I like it a lot. And this gives you a pretty realistic and true sense of what it was like to be there. And this is another one where I actually feel like this stands up, especially the sharpness in the vehicle, in the moped, for example. I think this stands up against a lot of pro cameras. This was from the hotel and another night shot. Like I said, I didn't take a ton of night shots, but the ones I did, I think this really executed well. Same with this one. These are all primary lens, I believe. And so they are capturing a lot of light and a lot of resolution and sharpness. And the way dark details are maintained, you can even see me there in the reflection, but not overblown. It still feels like a dark area. I feel like it does a great job with these. This was just some nice street art, wall art, like a mural essentially. And this was Dolores Park in the Mission District. I took a few photos here. This is primary sensor. That's 5x zoom. This is, I wanna say, one of the punch modes. So it's the primary sensor, but cropped in a bit. This is 5x again. And I love, especially with enough light, the 5x camera just shines. This is ultra wide. I thought this was just a cool composition. This is probably 2x or 1.5 off of the primary sensor and still plenty sharp. And then I just like this tag, free my boy. I just thought this was funny. So that's 5x. This, I wanna say, is ultra wide. And I really loved the composition and the detail in the shot. It actually might be primary sensor. It's so sharp. I feel like it's gotta be primary sensor. And this is an example of video on the telephoto 5x. It's a little choppy. I think it has something to do with the shutter speed and the fact that I shoot in 24 frames a second. This is another video though on the primary, and I feel like this is like perfect video. Being this close to it, I can see some flaws, but when I'm looking at it on the phone or even on the iPad, it stands up there as high quality video. You might be asking, you know, this is a video channel, why didn't I take a bunch more videos? But honestly, I wanted to be in the moment for the most part and just enjoy the trip. Taking stills was a way to capture that experience without overwriting the actual experience of being there. This is a really cool building in the Mission District. This shot's interesting because it's not like a beautiful image in a lot of ways. In fact, it shows a lot of the negatives of the 5X. There's image degradation. It's not really the most pleasing image I've ever taken, but there's something about this scene I just liked. I just liked the composition and everything and the way it compresses the image. I felt like keeping it here and showing it. Not every shot has to be the most breathtaking thing ever, and I still think this is a cool photo that showcases, you know, what it was like to be right here. Okay, this is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. This is the 5X zoom, another example where the 5X zoom is so clutch. So on the BART, I'm pretty sure that the drivers look back to make sure no one's walking in and out. I could be wrong on this, but I saw this a few times, and this time I captured it. And the driver's staring, I think, right at me, realizing I'm doing this. But I'm this far away. This is primary, and this is 5X actually zoomed in. These are within seconds of each other. And again, there's some loss of data here. It's definitely blurrier, grainier in the dark areas, but this is a photo I just wouldn't have gotten without that 5X. Then yeah, you can see the primary and just how, again, this is not like the best composed photo ever, but the detail and the sharpness and the color, the light, everything. I just think that primary sensor handles shots like a champ. This is another one of those at the Hot Cookie in the Castro district. I didn't take a bunch of pictures in the Castro. I didn't want to be like a space invader. I didn't want to like weird people out. I just like, I don't know. I tried not to take too many pictures of just people. I know as I just did this one, but in general, I tried to mostly capture spaces and leave people to their lives. But I thought this is a nice, sharp, and colorful image that kind of, again, shows the strengths of that primary lens. I went back to Dolores Park in the afternoon that day to get some different lighting and to just hang out. I ended up chatting with these two dudes on a bench for a while. They were super nice. I thought this was a cool example of the 5X again, and the way it captures motion. I think they're literally mid-volleyball game here. The ball is perfectly frozen, captured. There's a sharpness in the detail. You can see what everyone's doing, but it has that compression of space that I just love with the 5X. I loved it on the 3X, and I love it on the 5X. This is a low light shot. I don't think this is night mode. So this is right before the phone would have decided to go into night mode, and I like how it handled it. But this is one of those examples where I don't love how the iPhone handles yellow. And I think it's like a vestige of something they used to do with the sensors, especially on the 10S and the 10, where yellow is just really yellow. I don't know, there's something about it I just don't like, but I still think it's a nice image and I still like the way the buildings look, everything like that. This was a shot I really liked on the Muni, M-U-N-I, Muni, I think, going to Golden Gate Park. I took a few photos on a moving vehicle on the Muni, and I feel like it handled the sharpness really well, even in motion. This person's running, and this is what video looked like. I think this is the ultra-wide lens, could be wrong. Captured that really well too. This is a 5X. Again, I just like the way it compresses the hills and the space in San Francisco, but really anywhere with this sort of depth. I like the way the images look, especially on a smaller screen. I am sitting right next to a 42-inch TV, and so any flaws are really apparent here. They really aren't as bad when you're on a smartphone or even a tablet. Here's another 5X that I actually think handled sharpness and everything better than the last shot. This was cool. This was a plane in motion. I love how the 5X captured this, all the detail on the plane. It's like it's just floating there in the sky. It's crazy, not moving at all. And same thing in video. I think it captured it in video really well. This was like a heron or a stork, some kind of large bird. And at first I thought it was fake. I was like, whoa, they put like a prop in here. And then I was like, oh my gosh, no, this is a real bird. It was such a cool moment, again, to have a camera with this kind of reach. And that's digital zooming in from the 5X, and I still think it retains video like data here and resolution really well. And this is a digital zoom in off the 5X. Look at the detail of the well-lit leaves, for example, and even the bird. I'm surprised by how much detail you can grab zooming in from the 5X. This is 2X video, so that's a natural crop in on the sensor into 5X. It was just people skating, and I thought this would be fun on Instagram just to kind of show. But watching it back, I was like, wow, this is pretty great video still. And the thing I really like about the iPhone that many people have noted before is that because it smoothly transitions between lenses in a way that basically no other phone manufacturer does, you can do zooms in the shot and have a cohesive and coherent shot. There's some noticeable pop, right? Especially going from 2 to 5, but it's still usable. It matches the color. There's a lot of matching going on so that switching between the lenses feels natural, and it's something I wish every other phone manufacturer would steal. Because as good as some of the cameras on Samsung and Pixels are, I think they all struggle with those transitions in a way the iPhone does not. This is this beautiful building I should have explored more, but I was already on a bike. But I got a few photos of it, and I love the detail here. This has to be the primary because of all that sharpness and all that detail. Yeah, I was already on this bike. I just stopped to take the photo. This is where the ultra-wide's cool, just capturing the whole scene. And I rode the bike all the way to pretty close to the Golden Gate Park, and I captured this golf course. And then I ended up at the Golden Gate Bridge. I took this shot, which is the primary. And then I took this shot, which is a pano. And this, I think, is a pano with the 5X, which let me capture a lot of detail and the verticality of the bridge. And I love how this photo came out. I feel like panoramic photos were kind of almost a gimmick like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, but they've come so far to the point where it's a really cool way to capture truly large things like this. And I see basically no issues with this image, but if you see them, feel free to comment below. To me, this is just fantastic in resolution, composition, everything. And that comes down to the phone's ability to stitch multiple photos together to create this single image. I ended up at the Palace of Fine Arts and took a few photos here, and I loved how basically all of them came out. This is standard lens, standard as well, just moved. This is 5X, and again, color, detail, dark and light, it all stays really close to each other. So you feel like you're using one camera and one camera system rather than a series of divided lenses, which I love. This is the normal sensor, and then this is also the normal sensor. This is 5X, just capturing the intricate detail. It's, again, so cool to be able to reach like that. This is the standard, and I love the light and the dark here. We're just at this place with phone photography, and especially with the iPhone, in my experience, where it's just handling light and dark so well. You don't have this unnatural lightening of the dark areas. It's dark in the shot, but you can still see all the detail. This might be the 2X zoom. I just like the detail you see on the roof here, or the ceiling rather. This is 5X, the seagulls started to fly nearby. It's not a perfect image, but the ability to see like moving birds and be like, oh, I want that photo. I assign the camera to the action button, so I just hold the action button down, 5X capture. Not the best photo in the world, but the birds are captured sharply. The fact I was even able to take the photo speaks to something I love about the iPhone. The ability to quickly get to the camera, either by swiping to the right from the lock screen, or holding the action button, or holding the little icon on the lower right. It's very easy to get to the camera on the 15 Pro Max and capture quick images. This is another video. Again, I really love the sharpness of the video and the detail captured here. The iPhone, I'm not the first person to say this, but the iPhone is probably the best video camera in a phone, at least for like a standard phone. There may be a very niche Android phone that beats it, but I'm not aware of it. This is a shot on the primary that I just feel like is just a good photo. I don't know, I just threw it in, I like the photo. Capturing this image was cool. I love these buildings. I'd never heard of them or seen them before, but the way they're captured in the frame, the sharpness in the background and in the foreground, the fence moving towards the buildings. This is one of my favorite photos I took on the trip. Here you can see a bunch of people getting ready to watch fireworks that are not gonna happen for like 5 hours, because this was the 4th of July. There's just so much detail in the shot. I believe this has to be primary as well. This is pano with the primary lens, and I love, again, the ability to capture so much sharp detail in such a wide view. Yeah, panoramic photos have come a long way. And this is a 5X at Alcatraz. I just thought it was cool. It's, you know, you see some of that degradation for sure. Some breakdown in the actual sharpness of the image because it's a 5X, but it's just cool to be able to take that photo, even if there is some degradation. I got close to the beach and I like just the layout of the shot. This is that 5X punch in. The way the image is compressed, the depth is compressed here. It gives you this sense of kind of overwhelm, I feel like, of having that many people in one space. Gotta get the Ghirardelli shot. And I also got this person riding down on a bike that I thought was kind of funny. Hotel again. I took a really gnarly scooter, like a very sketchy scooter ride back to the hotel. Got probably my favorite shot I took of the Embarcadero. I think this is like the ferry building, I forget what it's called. I got super sunburned though. And this is the only selfie shot, I think, in this whole example set. And the selfie camera on the 15 Pro Max is probably too good. I actually don't like how sharp it is. It's really showing me that I am in fact 31. But it was kind of funny to capture the intense sunburn I got. And this was my last night here. This is 4th of July, so all these boats are going out. It's getting pretty dark, the fog's in the distance. This is the telephoto for sure. Telephoto again, just people walking. I didn't expect these images to look good at all. This time of day, this level of light on an older camera, on an older phone would have looked horrible. I'm not saying these are perfect, but they are totally usable, and especially at just showing what was happening with enough detail. I think these are good as far as what they could be even just a few years ago. And this is video. This is the 5X. This is where you do see some of that degradation, right? It doesn't have the ability to compress time and to take multiple images and get that detail back the way the stills do. But I wanted to capture this really large, like, cargo ship going in the opposite direction of all these boats going towards the fireworks. And again, I wouldn't put this in a movie. This is, I think, the weakest performance we see in this example set of photos and video. But especially on a phone screen, it looks totally good. It shows what was happening, right? And I'm so glad I have this video, even if this is definitely one of those areas where, okay, low light video, we still have plenty of room of improvement, or room for improvement on iPhone and all phones before it gets even close to even just like any camera I've ever used to film on my channel. But it's still a cool video. Now, this is what it looked like, 5X photo. Still, so much more detail because it's able to take multiple images and then use computational photography to bring them together, which is what's happening every time you take a smartphone photo. Here, it's almost night and day comparison between the breakdown in the quality of the image in the video and the sharpness in the still. Even if the still is not perfect, if the video looked as good as this, it would be like a generational leap. This was an ultra wide night shot. I think this is like a 2X, maybe the 1X, but I still think this is a nice image and it looks a lot better on a phone screen, and it's still pretty solid here, but there's a crunchiness to night mode I think can look kind of bad, and there's some of that here. This was me heading out. This was on the BART on the way to the airport. This is the airport, and again, I love the natural depth of field, the suitcase, looking at the gate. This is just a nice photo to me. Basically anything on the primary lens, like I said, I feel like could be from a real pro camera. And this is just an example of messing with focal lengths. All of these images are nice images to me. They have enough light and enough detail to work any one you choose, but I just like having the options here. And again, these are so quick to take. There's not really a delay. I think that's the other big thing on the iPhone compared to like the Samsung phones. Samsung phones and the Pixels can take nice photos. The iPhone can take nice photos like this. Just like back to back to back to back to back and not stop. This was, I thought, an okay telephoto photo. I like the guy walking, but then I got this one and there's just so much drama in it. This goes more to like composition than like quality of the photo, but I just like having the two subjects in the image. And I think this is an example of another photo where I just couldn't have got it without the 5X. I think it looks cool, I'm glad I have it. This is normal shot on the airplane. I like the way the characters, like the subjects look here. It just, again, that primary sensor, when we get to the point where every shot on all the camera lenses and all the sensors are as nice as this primary, which is probably between 2 and 3, maybe 4 generations from now. And if they can improve some of that low light video, I mean, I was in film school probably 7 or 8 years ago telling my professors I was pretty sure the next cohort or the cohort after me would be filming on their phones, and they didn't believe me. And the phones are already good enough now. This phone's already good enough now that you could totally film really high, like better quality video than any of us were filming in 2015, 16 in film school. But if every single sensor was as good as the primary, and if the video quality in low light was as good as the primary stills, I mean, it would close the gap. And we're getting really close. This is 5X from the plane looking down at Oregon. I love the detail here. This is Mount Hood. This is like 7 or 8X. So again, taking the optical, going even closer to get the mountain in the frame. And this looks so nice to me. The fact, again, you're starting at 5, lets you get digital in the zoom and still capture so much detail. And this is that in video form. When there's enough light, it really shines, no pun intended. The plane started to turn here too, and so the wing starts to naturally clip the mountain out of view. Oh, this is like, I love that shot. I love that shot. And it's just a phone in my pocket. I had the ability to get that. So cool. This one's fine, but it's an example of like where depth can get interesting. I'm not sure it nailed it here, but fascinating. And the light detail is good. And then I was back in Oregon, ultra wide, standard shot, and that's it. But it was so fun to take this camera with me on this trip and to just have it in my pocket. The battery life's amazing. There was only one day where I had to go home and charge it because it was too low. Basically every other day. Usually I could probably get 2 days of battery life with this phone, even taking photos and doing stuff. But I was using a lot of GPS and a lot of activity tracking with the watch synced to the phone. I think I did like between 18,000 and 20,000 steps almost every day. And so it was a bit of a stress test on the watch and the phone battery-wise, and it was still some of the best battery life I've ever gotten from any phone. So I would wholeheartedly recommend the iPhone 15 Pro Max as a vacation or destination, any kind of primary camera that you could have with you on a trip. I think it holds up in basically every situation. Maybe low light video on the telephoto is an example where there's a lot of room to grow, but even still, it's still better than every other phone I've used as a camera. I am excited to maybe someday get the Fujifilm if it ever shows up, but we'll see. There was definitely a part of me that considered canceling the Fujifilm pre-order after taking so many photos and loving how they looked with this phone. We'll see where I stand. I still probably have like 2 to 3 months to think about it. I do think I would love the Fuji if I had it. In the meantime, I'm so glad I had this. Thanks for watching. I hope you have an awesome week ahead, and I'll probably get back to music stuff next week, but I kind of wanted to talk about my trip and show these photos that I thought were pretty cool and how the camera held up, or how the iPhone held up as a camera. So I'll catch you next week, and yeah, hope you have an awesome week ahead. Peace.